Well, a very pleasant good morning and welcome to this month's members information session. I'm Dr. Lynette Holder, your moderator for the next few moments. It is my pleasure to welcome you on the SBA Zoom platform for another in our webinar series. Members and colleagues, friends will recall that we were here last January, and during that session, we took a look at prospects for 2026, and we heard from our noted economist, Justin Robinson, back then on what this new year portends for business, portends for the small business community in particular. Well, we're back here again in the month of March, in a sense, to continue that conversation, but to put it within the context of the recently presented financial statements and budgetary proposals. As you know, this is a feature of the annual estimates process here by government, and all sectors across our economy and society look forward to that presentation and to what the proposals will offer to their respective sectors and industries. And so today we are going to zoom in on Budget 2026, a discussion on the implications for business. We want to have an appreciation for the impact or the potential impact of the recently announced budgetary proposals on the small business sector in particular. So welcome to our session. For those of you who may be new to our platform, after the presentation by our subject matter expert, we will have an opportunity for Q&A. So I'm going to ask you to get your questions together, your comments, and we'll use the chat feature a little later on for that engagement. All of our sessions are recorded, so in the event that you miss any aspect of this presentation, fear not, you'll get the opportunity to go back and view this a little later on either the SBA's YouTube channel or on our website in the SBA TV section of the site. So you don't have to worry if you miss any aspect of it. All of our sessions are recorded. Also, let me use this opportunity to let you know that since the presentation of the budget, the SBA launched a poll. And the purpose of this is to be able to get some feedback, real-time feedback from you, our members, our stakeholders, our colleagues, on the actual budgetary proposal. So throughout the webinar today, the link will be placed in the chat, and I'm going to ask, if you have not had the opportunity yet to complete that survey, please go to the chat throughout this exercise and complete the form for us. Just 7 questions. All right. Very short. It's going to take you more than about 5 minutes to go on and answer those 7 questions for us. This is a significant part of our overall evaluation of these budgetary proposals from you, the small business sector. So please, if you have not yet done so, we're asking you to go click on that link in the chat and complete this survey for us. Thank you so much for your support. I'll give that announcement a little later on too, for those who may have joined us a little bit late. So no stranger to the Small Business Association and to our platform, we have today Mr. Jeremy Stephen. He's going to help us distill this topic and share his perspectives on the recent budget. So in case you don't know him, which I suspect maybe very few of us, Mr. Stephen is an economist with extensive experience in private equity and economic consulting across Barbados and the wider Caribbean. He is a former president of the Barbados Economic Society and specializes in corporate advisory, financial due diligence, and economic analysis, with particular expertise in emerging areas such as cryptocurrency, economics, and blockchain. So over the years, he's provided advisory services to a range of regional and international organizations, including the Government of Barbados, the Caribbean Development Bank, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Authority. He's also served as the chairman of the board of COSCAP right here in Barbados. Mr. Stephen has contributed to academia as a lecturer in banking and finance at the University of the West Indies Cape Head campus and has co-authored notable research on cryptocurrencies and their potential role in central bank reserves. So it is our pleasure at this time, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Small Business Association and friends, to welcome to our March webinar platform, Mr. Jeremy Stephen, to help us understand the budget recently presented 2026 and the implications or the impact on business and in particular the small business sector. So let's welcome Jeremy at this time to give his presentation.
All right. Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Perfect. Dr. Oda, sorry. Thanks again for having me on this forum. It's always an absolute pleasure, especially when a fellow Britanite is able to have that much trust in me that I wouldn't go above and beyond my remit. Nonetheless, I wanted to also thank Charles Carter. I have over the years not paid the right respects to him. Charles is actually a former player, basketball player with me on the national team, junior national team, way back. So I do have a lot of
Very good.
familiarity, at least when he was a lot more innocent than he tends to be nowadays. And I wanted to give special mention because I'm quite sure she will be clocking exactly what I'm saying. I see Dr. Scott Joseph on here. And I wanted to say good morning to her. And I'm very open for her to, if she wanted to make interventions as well, because she's a very, very esteemed well, her expertise, as far as I'm concerned, would be public economics, amongst others. And good morning to Kevin Willis, also a colleague of mine, and Kathy Daniel, another colleague, and I would go as far as to say an auntie of mine on a good day. So I just want to do everybody proud this morning and share what I have on screen. Stand by. I have a presentation I'm going to submit to the Small Business Association, but again, I had an issue over this morning. But good and luckily for us, there is part and parcel of the budgetary proposals, an appendix that has all 63, not 64, because the government once again rushed this budget and missed the whole number out. So it's 63, you would see in appendix number 164, but it's truthfully 63 different initiatives that the government has had. And we can break them down into a few categories, believe it or not. The one that I think would be more interesting to all of us in here as average citizens of Barbados, average residents of Barbados, and for the majority of you small business people, would be the policies that affect cost of living. But allow me to say something very much up front. I don't want to bring into this forum today the whole idea of rating a budget 6 out of 10, 6.5 out of 10. That's economist talk. But to be very specific to each and every one of you, the budget has, I believe, more benefits than costs if you were to think about it from a very insular, business-driven, and for a small part, a consumer point of view. In that, it means that the government has set about announcing, because a lot of this is an announcement, right? Announcing some measures that's supposed to drive two key things, well, three things in a sense in Barbados. It's supposed to drive your consumption. In other words, they want to encourage the average Barbadian to spend more. And in any environment, any policy that drives spending benefits small business as it does large businesses. Of course, we know a lot of the friction that you tend to have in where it concerns small businesses all pertains to, say, the ease of doing business. So even if everybody opens up their wallets, everybody opens up their purses and says, small business, come take my money. If you cannot, say, file taxes quicker, than you had before if all the roadblocks with respect to regulations in your particular industries, the ease of getting raw materials into the country, if that, amongst other things, just interfacing with government, getting government to give permissions and to process whatever needs to be processed in your particular industry so that you can operate. If those are not eased, it doesn't matter how easy it is for, say, the average consumer to take part or to purchase your products and services, it still can be a headache. In fact, it might be more of a headache. So there's a number of policies that's supposed to, let's say, assist with the cost of living, but also to drive expenditure. I'm going to read each one and explain where I see the benefits are, because not to replace the Minister of Finance, but I'm very sure in Barbados, most people don't watch the budget from beginning to end. I'm somewhat encouraged to do so for many a reason. So from next week, really, the government is supposed to, number one, in the cost of living section of the budget, absorb half of the fuel clause adjustment on electricity bills above what your March bill would have been for the next 3 months. So the cost of the subsidy is supposed to, well, that doesn't matter to you guys, but is a minor cost to government. Now, that policy alone, amongst others, I'll group some of the others as well, it is a funny one as far as I'm concerned. It does allow some bit of freedom for the average person to spend more. It should, if the government spends more time on details. Again, this is one of the issues I've had with some of the past budgets where they've had some very marked or marked, depending on if it's British or American English, strategies and initiatives. But because details were lacking, or in some cases, allegedly, that the public sector officers themselves weren't even sure how to implement these policies or how to execute on them, it always led to some issue, okay? Some major issue in terms of implementation, and you would have to extend when these initiatives would come in. Perfect example of that would have been even the minimum wage bill some years ago and why that was late in its implementation. So I'm not sure if, or it's not been explicitly said, if the absorption of the fuel clause adjustment by 50% is just for households versus businesses as well, commercial. So depending on how your business is registered, as far as I'm concerned, onto more detail arises, and we have a week just to get that detail. I'm not 100% sure if this benefits, say, small businesses that aren't at home, aren't operating from their homes, if you see where I'm coming from. Number two and number three are very, very clear. From April 1st for a year, VAT will be capped. And also, VAT will be capped on gasoline and diesel by their varying amounts. This is good for transportation businesses. You can plan for the next year to a point. How much, well, what your transportation costs will be for delivery. If you're inside logistics, that could help at least with your budgeting. But here's the issue. Even if you look at number four, where the excise tax, and I had called for this one, charge on gasoline would be reduced by roughly 10 cents and diesel roughly 10 cents. That number three and four can almost guarantee, yes, some predictability on taxes. The government takes a small hit on those taxes with the hope that it at least boosts the economy, but the government doesn't have the ability to control costs over the long run of the imported cost of fuel, or rather what they buy FOB for fuel. They did say that for the next 3 months that they're able to lock in prices at 92 cents a barrel US. No, sorry, $92 a barrel US. And one of my arguments or bugbears with that strategy has been, okay, it's good to lock in the price, but if it is that you're reviewing the strategy, as was said during the budget, reviewing that strategy in 3 months' time, that's what was said. I don't know if a correction was made. The volatility in the marketplace for oil has been so crazy that the general trend is that prices are going up. So for me, my advice to the government, if they were to take that advice, was to revisit these future contracts more frequently. I do know that the National Energy Company, they actually import fuel on a fortnightly basis. Every 2 weeks, fuel comes into the country. I am not clear on how often they order fuel, but I'm thinking for the time being, it makes more sense for them to spend more money up front, ordering more often so that they can lock in the best prices possible. So suffice to say, number four, number three, and number five, if you look at that, are not enough. They are given an ease. So there's some measure of predictability. Luckily, and this one, I think, and I'm glad they announced it rather early in the budget, number six and seven. Number six and seven is very important when it comes to those of you who import raw materials. One of the major issues, and I'm quite sure on a forum that I had with the Barbados with the Small Business Association some time ago, I was explaining one of the issues that the country had, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lynette. If we were to move, or sorry, if we consider the fact that it's the landed cost on which the excise taxes were charged on, landed cost of items, every item, it was on the landed cost. So shipping was included, and you pay the excise tax on the shipping costs as well. And then worse yet, VAT was on the same landed cost and also any excise taxes that you paid. So whatever the VAT was, it was charged on a lot, leading to what we call in economics, but in a sense, double cascading, a cascading effect of taxes, taxes on taxes, in a sense. So luckily, the Minister of Finance announced that from next week, it's the free on board value, FOB, free on board value, that they would be using to calculate customs duty on food, personal care items, and construction. So if you're in the construction industry, the cost of your materials, assuming shipping costs stay the same, and we know that's not where it's going with the conflict in Iran, but assuming that let's say that had no impact or it had little impact, then the cost of construction materials should fall by the amount of savings that you get from moving from a CIF value to a FOB value. I hope I'm very clear with that. And furthermore, from April 1st, they're going to also be calculating duties and VATs, CIF shipments, sorry, on 20-foot containers. So in other words, that section number seven, they're locking in the value. They recognize that the cost of containers is growing at an astronomical rate. And I mean, I was one that wanted a 20-foot container just for storage. And I remember the days when you could get one of those for less than 7,000 Bajan, 4,000 or 5,000 Bajan, not that long ago. And they're saying that they're going to, if you're bringing in a full load, so not a LCL shipment, but a full load, that the amount they're going to process or your VAT is going to be based on a $3,000 cap, US dollar cap on 20-foot containers, and a 40-foot container would be capped at 6,000. So at least from that point of view, that VAT component is quite predictable. So there's compared to last year's budget, if one does not put in the effect that this war in Iran will have and continue to have for the near and long term, it actually is the budget that allows the small business associations, members, and other small businesses across the country some measure of predictability, some measure. All right. From a personal point of view, you have, let's say, I don't want to use the term that I'm thinking, but let's say lower income persons, that if you cater to lower income persons from this income year, the reverse tax credit is going to increase, which means there should be more, well, not significantly more, but at least some measure of an increase in disposable income, especially for lower income persons. Furthermore, it also persists, if you look at number 9, for middle income, lower middle income persons, although a $750 reverse tax credit isn't anything to shout about. Nonetheless, it is disposable income. So again, as I say, three components. So far, you might be seeing it that the government was focusing on driving construction, not construction, construction, yes, driving consumption, driving expenditure, funnily enough, driving investment, especially where it concerns number six, the recalculation of VAT and excise taxes on free on-board values of construction materials. Moving on, you will see that there's an increase in the compensatory income credit. So again, it's all about increasing disposable income for consumption purposes. And furthermore, the fact that income taxes are falling for those in the lower bands from 12.5 to 11.5%, that percentage has meant that there's 16.4 million more dollars that's going to be in circulation for consumption purposes. And for those that manage to creep up into the upper income bands, they're also going to save a percentage on their taxes. That's going to cost the government 9.7 million. So for those that would be considered upper income, you have at least 9.7 more million dollars that can be redistributed through the society, through the economy, by ways of expenditure, personal expenditure for those in the upper middle class. Notice I said it is a excuse me, a minimum of 9.7, because of course the 16.4, part of that 16.4, if you know how income taxes work, would be paid, that is lost to government, would normally, or before this adjustment from next fiscal year, which starts next week, part of that 16.4 would have been paid by the upper middle class and the wealthy anyhow, just the way how income taxes work. So part of this 16.4, yes, you can say is middle class, money that would be spent or can be spent by the middle class in the upcoming tax year, but part of it also is the upper middle class and the wealthy. So in all instances, I'm not saying that this policy has freed up income similar for all classes similarly, but nonetheless, it has freed up at least for the lower income class. It's $400 extra that each person could spend predominantly from the reverse tax credit once it's received later on in the tax year, up to about 9.7 million for sure that the upper middle class and the wealthier amongst us is going to be able to spend. But further to that, you've got the cost of living cash credit for pensioners. So pensioners themselves, by receiving an additional 100 Beijing per month starting next week, that should also mean that pensioners, in theory, have a bit more to spend. Now, here's one of the funny things so far with what I've been talking about. It does not assume inflation. It does not assume inflation. I don't know if any of you, by a show of hands, gets where I'm coming from. Because again, normally inflation can happen even without the war in Iraq and the instability that's coming about, say, from the Don Roe doctrine, as they call it nowadays, or let's say US foreign policy. But the fact remains that you've got major sources of volatility, major sources of inflation, all stemming not just from instability, stemming from the Strait of Hormuz, but definitely the fact is that all energy markets are trying to find energy at whatever cost and are willing to pay more in some cases. And then there are other countries that have deliberately, like the Philippines and New Zealand to an extent, decided to reduce their own output or their own productive capacity. Sri Lanka as well, by reducing the number of days that they work and also rationing fuel. That's going to affect productive capacity globally. It's just a matter of time before you start to hear the same pertaining to Taiwan and China as well. And that definitely means in economics, if you've got shortages, if it becomes more expensive to produce something or you can't produce it on time or as frequently as you did before, if volumes are going to be impacted, you should expect price increases beyond the normal amount. I tend to tell people, as an oversimplification, you can get an idea of where global inflation is going based on interest rates. If interest rates are rising or if they fall. If it makes it more expensive for persons, businesses to borrow to increase production or productive capacity, it's going to feed into inflation down the line. I remember, for the most part, every economist will tell you this: Barbados doesn't necessarily produce its own inflation; it tends to be imported. So if interest rates globally go in one direction, they don't come down, or they stay the same for too long, you should expect some constant or some increase in inflation down the line. So with all the measures that were put in place, where government says, okay, we're reducing the tax burden on you. The first 13 measures we spoke about are all about reducing the burden on the average citizen, and therefore corporations by extension. Because nothing there actually speaks specifically to reducing corporation burdens other than the import taxation, the change of policy regarding how they calculate import taxes. But truth be told, that's all they can do right now, because funnily enough, our productive capacity isn't one that takes a large section or large load of material that's produced internally. Other than agriculture, what else can be produced without importing some bit of an input? So you still have to watch what's going on globally and see that although the government is giving an ease, it may or may not, depending on, as I keep saying over and over, the instability stemming from Iran. I would even go as far as to say, if the war between Russia and Ukraine extends down the line, and what China plans to do about Taiwan, because I don't think a lot of people notice this. There was some deadline that they set for either this year or early next year for them to have a very strong, I don't want to use the term takeover, but it reads as such. But definitely, they're going to strengthen their position on Taiwan by this year, later on this year, early next year. It's pretty much a public initiative. It's not anything that you can't Google right now on your computers. So there is a cloud of inflation that I don't think a lot of these policies can protect you from, although it's going in the right direction to give the small business community in Barbados some confidence. Okay. Furthermore, just to continue, you look at number 14 and 15, pensioners are getting the ease. There's 11 million more dollars that will be in circulation via those that have qualified for a pension in Barbados because of the change of a taxable allowance for pensioners from 50K to 75,000. Furthermore, those not in receipt but are older than 65 years old are going to get a living credit, cash credit of $100 extra per month. Maybe that's a few, if you're in the food business, and maybe that helps. If you're in the home care business, maybe that might be a good signal to you. I don't know what the home care rates are at this point. I don't know what the home health rates are in the market at this point. I can afford neither. But nonetheless, that presents an opportunity, assuming inflation stays consistent. And by the way, I am one who does not mind being interrupted via the chat. I just want to read what Mr. Willis put up about 8 minutes ago. I missed that entirely. He's saying, to further have a reduction on the cost of living, the government of Barbados should expand the calculation of import duty and excise taxes on FOB value across all imports, as opposed to the CIF value. That is also true. Commercial costing practices will already factor in CIF value in their costing, and using CIF value to calculate import duties and taxes on CIF value. It's just compounding the landed cost. That is a very fair assumption. I also thought that they should have changed the FOB across the board. And I mean, okay, it comes down to whether the government at the time realizes truthfully, that we're going into an emergency situation. I don't wish to scare anybody at all. While I'll read what you put there, Kevin, and you are correct. I see what you're saying, but I don't wish to scare anybody. But truthfully, 100% truthfully, I don't see a difference between this situation with the war in Iran and COVID. I literally do not see it. Everything in my training, everything in my skeptical being, everything in my, I guess, yeah, skeptical being points me in a direction that says the market for logistics will be no different to what you saw in COVID. It literally is the same thing. And therefore, any government that doesn't see what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, and even if they manage to bypass the Strait of Hormuz, because there's talks about using the port of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. So that's on the western side of Saudi Arabia, as opposed to the eastern side, which abuts the UAE and therefore the Strait of Hormuz. If they manage to bypass for the port of Jeddah, Iran has sympathizers in the form of the Houthis, right? And those guys were causing a lot of problems in that same area last year. Short-lived as it might have been, but it did not mean that that regime disappeared overnight. So you can have two choke points if this thing isn't calculated seriously, and it can lead to, again, a significant drag on the productive capacity of China. China imports most of its fuel out of Iran. Luckily, Russia has some sanctions dropped on it, but Russia's ability to make up that shortfall caused by the holding of fuel or ships in the Strait of Hormuz is barely anything, right? Barely anything. And if you think Nigeria could fill the shortfall, or even Venezuela, both of those now, those countries have to align themselves with US foreign policy based on, I don't want to use the word invasions, but definitely in the case of Nigeria, the invasion that happened mid-January that most of us seem not to have followed. To read what Kevin also put up about 3 minutes ago, VAT is also a compounded tax being calculated on import duty, right? We mentioned that. So to use the increased value to calculate VAT, which has a cash flow impact to importers and businesses. I would say though, for some of the products, the VAT is still going to obviously be calculated as normal. As I said earlier, it's a cascading type of tax. It's a tax on taxes. Also, the actual value of the material, right? That's important. So I like to tell people that in the case of what the government has done, for some products, the VAT should actually fall. If companies are in a position to change their accounting to mirror this, that is an internal issue. But the way how it's supposed to be calculated, even from my quick analysis of it, it should actually cause the VAT to fall. The problem now is the multi-stage approach. How much do you value your retail, your wholesaling process and your retailing process? Can you make an argument? And some companies will do this. My expectation is going to be the larger businesses that will do this, that would effectively argue that they were discounting the true value of the wholesaling process, distribution process. I mean, you can't tell somebody how long it takes to drive from point A to point B, right? You can't. You can't tell somebody if they, truthfully, if they have a multi-stage wholesale, distributive, and retail process, what each step in that productive process is truly worth. So I suspect some businesses are going to say, well, look, we've been discounting for this long. We had the PAT, the price impact that kept prices frozen for so long. And this is how we discounted. Now we've got a bit of freedom in terms of the calculation of that, especially, and the calculation of excise taxes on the FOB for certain produce, certain things. Then there's a lot more space. And we can actually start to calculate each step at its true cost to the company. I am not going to be surprised if that's an argument that's going to come out. I can't see an individual small business making that argument. I can see the Small Business Association making an argument for it. Hint, hint, I'm not being paid for anything, so I did not give advice. So, uh, Andrea just asked me a question I'm going to speak to, and then I'll move on. How will elderly care service providers assess $100 monthly for those patients who are under the government's alternative care program and for whom they have responsibility, or will they not receive the $100 monthly? Andrea, remember, if you were on earlier, a lot of this stuff, these policies are always created, more so over the last 10 years, without much thought to detail. The execution of most of these things still being deliberated. And I await a little more detail when it comes to the regulations. So the change in regulations that support these things. So I'm not sure. I can't answer this because there's not been any documentation that comes up to say who's going to accept the additional $100 a month. What I would say is somebody is going to be able to accept it because they've created in their minds right now a provision. I hope that answers the question. Let me know. Okay. So moving on. We will see now that welfare rates by the SCA are going to be increased by 30%. Whatever that means, I am not 100% sure what that means because in the past, and again, it's all about stoking, disposable income. And if it is the case that they're going to increase welfare rates by 30%, this does not tell me that they're going to actually increase the provision, the actual provision of it. So a major part of my problem with number 16 has always anything to do with the SCA, to be honest, has always been when you get the cash, when you get rebates, when you get welfare. If you don't improve that, it doesn't matter if you're getting more, right? So the budget doesn't necessarily speak to when welfare rates or the welfare would be paid out, if it's going to be paid out, as it has been, which has been slow in recent history, slower than it should be. Okay. But if you are buying into the belief that, and maybe they have the capacity to do it, there's been talk about factoring facilities. So if you're buying into the belief that government has the capacity to do factoring, then by all means, maybe this is something that would interest you as a small business, especially with number 17, that being that persons receiving welfare benefits will receive the cost of living cash credit of $100 per month for 1 year. Cash credits typically aren't necessarily paid to the person themselves, right? So it would mean if you think that those living on welfare are a target market, and believe you me, there are a lot of businesses in Barbados, they may not be members of the Small Business Association, that believe those that are lower income and receiving welfare benefits are a prime target market. They tend to open up shop in Bridgetown. All right. From a personal point of view, the next one probably makes a little more sense. You're going to get a bit of a VAT ease, definitely on top of the fuel adjustment clause and government saying that they're going to pay half of that. Oh, I forgot to make the point I was supposed to make about that. I don't see much sense in it, by the way, in terms of government having to pay out half the money for the adjustment to the fuel adjustment clause or covering half of it. I think, yes, if they want to cover half of it, fine. But the fuel adjustment clause is set based on, yes, what the price of fuel is on the global market. But here's the issue. Government in Barbados, as far as I know, and I want to be corrected on this, is the prime importer of fuel, regardless of the entity that wants to use that fuel. So if government itself is locking in a price of $92 a barrel, where for the next 3 months, the price of fuel goes up above, say, 120 US a barrel, you're being charged electricity based on the fact that that price on the global market is 120 US a barrel. But the government is basically feeding it into Barbados at $92 a barrel for the next 3 months. It means any adjustment to the fuel adjustment clause is accounting for an increase in costs that EMIRA might not be necessarily taken in for the next 3 months, is what I'm saying. So the government of Barbados, for that measure, is being rather kind. And it does help us as the average consumer. Now, and that's my understanding, I could be wrong. So with number 18, that's a further help to those paying bills. Your VAT is going to drop for the next year starting next week. There are two community resilience programs, which helps where it comes to the extension of waivers, VAT waivers on sale and installation of water tanks and septic tanks and electrical pumps and pressure tanks for 2 years. That helps the construction industry and those of you who are handy and maybe members of the Small Business Association. It means maybe homeowners will try to get ahead and buy these items very soon, especially since they'll be saving 17.5% and a little bit more perhaps. And there are also the waivers on generators, the installation and purchase of generators and transfer switches. So those of you looking to do anything electrically. Yeah. So let me just move ahead. Those are a bit. Let me move ahead. If any of you right now are into April, I'm looking at the growth enhancement measures. You're going to get a 50% rebate and up to $5,000 per year on any inputs into the industry. So it could be for hives, foundation frames, smokers, and hive tools. I'm trying to look at more specifically anything that benefits small businesses. You know, if you're into agriculture, there's at least 32, 33 that I think would help small businesses, particularly in agriculture. And those would be annual rebates of $5,000 for the utilization of organic material for fertilizer, plant and animal input. So it's a decent time, I guess, to start growing, at least at some scale. If you're into, no, because time is running, if you look at number 36, for example, these I think are very applicable when it comes to small businesses that are on the import side. And also, when we look at the trust loans, I'm going to look at that in a bit as well. But from April 1st, so from next week, courier and postal shipments for personal use, these might be beneficial. That the de minimis threshold now allows you to import anything without duty, and it's going to be tax-free, up to $150 BH. And that would actually help if you plan your imports properly. That would be helpful, especially if you plan on importing as raw materials, cheap raw materials to do whatever the case may be. I can't tell you. And also anything between $150 and $199 is charged on FOB and it will be duty free. But you will have VAT at anything over $200 FOB would be charged duty and VAT. But these things don't include what you call sin products. So alcohol, cannabis, vaping, cigars, cigarettes, and manufactured tobacco. For small businesses in particular, I would say this limit, 37, is very important. The loan limit being increased to $20,000 from the trust loans. That is rather helpful. And also, very important, those of you earning less than 350 grand from October this year would not be required to charge VAT. Is the best way I can put it. That for me is fundamentally good for the small and micro businesses in Barbados to compete. Okay, I hope you guys are aware of that one. That is a very important one. And if you involved in tourism from the first, I don't know how many of your members are on the TDA or fall under the concessions with the TDA. But before you even get there, number 41, the enactment of the deposit insurance legislation for credit unions. I know a lot of small businesses do business with the credit unions. That actually is helpful because it allows the credit unions to actually do more with their money in a very oversimplified manner. They can give more of various types of loans down the line if they're able to have that form of deposit insurance. Don't have the time to explain what I see as the mechanics for it. Those of you also that might be renting cars, if you look at item 43, effective from July, rental car companies will be designed as eligible tourism services under the Tourism Levy Act. So basically, you should be getting extensions there. Trying to find something else that I think is applicable. Sorry. Standby, standby. Where else? Where else? Right. If any of you also are in the act of digitizing your business or the business process engineering, you're going to be given 100% tax credit for the next income year starting April 1st. So if you're going to digitize the business, you can claim back that money up to 100% of what you spent, right? And that could be a very helpful small business initiative. You've got also the fact that standalone restaurants will be able to access duty-free exemptions on spirits. So those of you that have small restaurants, that should be helpful. And moving on, I think, although this one isn't necessarily very much imbued with small business, one of the only ones that I have no issue with, or two of them, the establishment of a global youth fund, but also, well, three of them, the introduction of the Secondary School Students International Exposure Initiative. I think those are vital long-term investments in training persons on what international standards mean. And then last but not least, the very much debated Barbados Republic Child Wealth Fund. I have no issue with that. $5,000 given by the government at birth and invested on your child's behalf. My calculations are by the child turns 21, it should be around $20,000 if inflation rates stay modest and interest rates, long-term interest rates stay in that 6 to 7 to 8% region. You're looking at probably $21,000. The government says less, but $21,000 is my calculation by age 21 per child for those being born now, I should say. With that being said, we've explored quite a bit of the measures. And some of them I think that would be truthfully the interesting for small businesses in particular. They didn't necessarily give, as far as I'm concerned, or maybe I missed it somehow, any particular things that says, well, small businesses, you only benefit from this and this alone. The budget before, not the last one, was probably the last I saw anything that extensive. But nonetheless, these things benefit, particularly the VAT limits. It allows small businesses, assuming all is stable, to compete. I guess I've spoken way too much. So if you all have any questions right now, as protocol has stated, I guess this is the time to ask.
All right, Jeremy, thanks very much. Yes, the VAT threshold is one of those measures for small businesses specifically. As you know, that's an area that we lobbied on, and we're very pleased to see it's moved from 200,000 to 350. When we polled members, we in our focus groups, members were actually calling for 500,000, but we put 350, and we're pleased that government honored that request and gave you 350. But the other one that is specific to small business, which you didn't mention, is factoring, because that's another area that we would have lobbied on, because again, small businesses complained about the length of time it took for their invoices to be settled, particularly with government departments. And so the factoring initiative, $3 million being set aside for the central bank to administer for factoring, is one of those that, we think is beneficial to small businesses. So I want to get your take on that. And then Pravina asks your input on the collateral registry. What are your thoughts on the collateral registry regime? So those two, Jeremy, if you can give us your perspectives, we'd appreciate it.
No worries. I did mention the factoring thing. I just didn't point to which number it was at. I did mention it. All right. So I have partial partial reservations when it comes to factoring. Allow me to explain why. So let me assume that your members know what factoring is. You would say you're confident that persons on here have an idea
But
of what factoring is, right?
yeah, you can. We do, but for there might be one or two who don't. So you can go ahead and give a definition if you want. That's fine.
No problem. So the worst example I could give is one of pawning, right? So if any of you have pawned or know anybody that pawned something, essentially, if you have a invoice that you don't think a person will pay on time, or some customer of yours would not pay on time, the factoring exercise is one that says, all right, let me sell this invoice to a bank or to some financial institution. The financial institution therefore takes over the role of retrieving the full amount of the invoice if they can. But in exchange, because you sold it, they sell you, they pay you an amount. But obviously, for them to make money, the amount that they pay will be less than what the value is of the invoice, because they're taking on the risk of probably not even recovering the full amount. So there's nothing wrong with that. Factoring is something that's practiced all across the world. My problem has always been A, how slow civil courts are in Barbados. So the ability to actually chase down the money on the part of the financial institution in full is something I would await to be seen, which would make it favorable. B, I think the amount that they put aside at the central bank is too little. And it's not even based on a hunch. It's just based on if you break down GDP by by consumption, total consumption numbers on the island in any given year, that amount is less than 1%. I can't see that less than 1% of bills, in total value of bills, I should say, is enough to cover it. Like in the first year, I think they're going to be inundated with invoices totaling that amount or more. To be honest, I think the 3 million is way too low. I think they should fund it with about 20 to 30 million to start and make it a revolving scheme. Any amount that is saved in the year will be re-put into boss bonds, and then using the boss bonds, the interest from the boss bonds over the year, government will help fund, but you're also getting back money from that to top up the fund. It has to grow because as the economy grows, you're going to get cases where invoices are not going to be paid. Larger invoices were not going to be paid as frequently, right? That is my overarching theory. I think it's too little, way too little. When I heard it, that's why I said I don't even know if they're going to action it anytime soon. Because 3 million to capitalize that, that's way too low. So, especially based on Barbados' GDP, like way too low. But put that aside. The other question is one I don't even think I have the ability to answer for the first time in my life. In terms of the collateral registry, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to work. I really don't. I am at a loss for words and ideas, and I await more specifics on it. Then I might be in a better place to explain that, Pravina.
Okay. All right, but let me jump in. Jeremy, I heard your reservations relative to the factoring program, and you're right.
Mm,
It is used all over the world, very successful in other markets. Believe it or not, I can't see why it won't be successful in our market as well. But I mean, the factoring initiative and the factoring project was announced and introduced primarily to factor government receivables. Okay? So that's the primary target and the primary focus, not necessarily private sector entities, but government receivables. We have members that we often have to lobby on their behalf with one particular ministry, and they have a new minister now, so I'm not sure if you're going to see any significant improvement. But one particular ministry, the Ministry of Transport and Works, can you imagine a small business that provided equipment to that ministry, waiting 6 months, 9 months? We had a situation with 9 months for an invoice to be settled, right? Just ridiculous, completely ridiculous. That is very crippling to the small business. So it is against that backdrop
oh
that if we
yeah.
deal with government receivables only, then that agency just simply has to collect on the government receivables, factor the invoice, allow the business to get on, with their management of the firm. Obviously, less whatever the rate that would be charged if it's 1%, 1.5%, and it saves you having to wait 9 months for an invoice to be settled. Yeah.
Okay, but all right. So during setting that parameter, and thank you for reminding me about that part. Setting that
Hmm.
parameter. Okay, here's my other reservation. Again, I think it can work. Don't get me wrong. I actually support factoring initiatives. I actually worked with one when I was studying, and well, just after I came out from my master's in England. So it's not something benign. I think is important. I also just believe they need to be well capitalized. So,
Agreed.
and,
Agreed.
and then I still think, just
Hmm.
based on the amount that government puts out in contracts in any given year, that 3 million
Hmm.
is still too tight, especially if you're not clear on the recapitalization rules. I honestly think you can't pay money with bonds, but some portion of it should be in bonds, some portion. I would feel a little more confident because that's a revolving loan. I would a revolving loan to government. So I would feel a little more confident if there was some portion of it, some portion
All
straight up
right.
from that, some portion from
Uh-huh.
the boss, from boss giving out boss bonds at a favorable rate or something. Otherwise, I don't know. I think
I
it's
don't
low.
know. The small business person wants to get some
They
cash
want
in their
cash.
hands. They want
Yeah,
cold hard cash when they provide that service, that product to government. They want cold hard cash.
I
Yes.
agree.
So
And
we have,
year one and year
let's
two, they will get it.
yeah,
But
so
year three, year
let's
four,
see if we
testing.
can get that $3 million into circulation, and hopefully we can make a play then by the next budget for a top up, if you will, and increase in the fund. My only challenge, I will admit, is central bank. That is that is that is
Right.
where that's where I have my question mark. I remember years ago listening to Professor was his name, Prasad, Avinash
Hmm.
Prasad, making a point in a lecture to the sector that he has reservations about central banks in general administering funds for MSME development. Right? I heard him with that point. I will admit, I have a similar reservation because central banks, by their very nature and as a creature of monetary policy and so on, is highly bureaucratic in nature. So that is maybe my one concern relative
Mm.
to this. But we'll see how it goes. So $3 million in the first instance, and yes, we'll see how it goes. Relative to the collateral registry, Pravina asked about this earlier. The collateral registry really is not new. I think it's been mentioned in the budget because again, we've had to advocate why is it taking so long to be operationalized because it's not new. It was actually announced, if you recall, a while ago. The framework was established, the ability to, for you as a farmer to use your tools, equipment, and other type of businesses using the movable assets in your transaction with the financial agency. So if it is fund access, if it is a trust, well, trust fund doesn't require collateral, but let's say that it is fund access, enterprise growth fund, or even some of the bigger institutions that you're able to use the non-traditional type of assets to secure your loan, to secure your credit, right? The framework was established, the framework was prepared some time ago. The fact is that it is not operational. And so when it was mentioned in the budget, it was simply the simple point mentioned in the budget was that government will now move to enact the collateral registry. But the work has already been done by the ministry and several stakeholders, SBA being one of them, that contributed to the conversation and the framework around the collateral registry. So it's really just to get it operational now. Yeah. But if you look to the chat, Jeremy, you have a couple of additional queries here. Let me use the opportunity to remind members and colleagues on the call that we've placed a link in the chat. We're asking you please to click on that link and answer those short questions there for us on the budget. Just 7 questions. Please answer and help us with our overall assessment of the budget, especially as it relates to small businesses. Um, I have a query here, Jeremy. I saw you're saying this point. I think it's Bernardo.
Yeah.
If you can offer a comment.
Oh, but I guess there's more along the lines of what you were talking about. If it's the banks or the central bank that would administer the collateral registry, I,
Or
I,
the
I
right, yes, the collateral registry. Well, it's a creature of the ministry, really, the Ministry of Energy and Business, and I think the ministry now has been renamed, so it's the Ministry of Energy, Business Development, and Commerce, and they're responsible for the framework. So we just want to get it operational. Yeah.
But what I keep saying here is rather important that
Hmm.
that's Dr. Anki Scott Joseph from UE is saying that the registry is the most important measure in the budget for some SMEs. Without the registry, unsecured loans could be 9 to 12%. With the registry loan rate, approximately a secured loan should cost you between 5 to 7%. So on average, you should be able to save with the registry intact 3 to 5
Mm.
percentage points
Yeah.
as an SME.
I think the minister didn't go into a lot of detail on it because the truth is, as I said, it's not new. The collateral registry, if you go back and you do some research, you'll see the collateral registry was developed. Actually, here's the irony of it. The current minister, Minister Simmons, who has now returned to that ministry, was the minister who actually piloted the collateral registry when he was first there as that minister. He was the one who actually piloted that, who oversaw the development of the framework and so on. So something then we're not so sure what happened after there was a change in the minister there. But I know that he was the one who actually spearheaded that work on the collateral registry, so it's not new. Maybe it is fortuitous now that he's back and he's able to maybe pick up from where he left off, if I can use that language. But Anki Scott, you are correct. We want to get the registry going because it has significant potential to assist small firms who would not have the traditional type of collateral to be able to access loans, access credit from various financial institutions.
Yep, and therein is the issue designing that legislation.
Mm.
Yeah, that's why I'm just waiting. For me, I rather talk about this once the legislation is intact. Once I get a bit more guidance, because it's a
Right.
big promise, a huge promise.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you prefaced, Jeremy, your presentation this morning by making the point. The fact is that yes, you have these measures, you have the announcements, if you will, of measures, but it is now the operationalization of them, putting them
Correct,
into reality, practical implementation. That often is the issue, right? That's where you
yeah,
get into, the weeds, if you will. How quickly can government move to enact some of the provisions and ensure that the public sector, um, who often has that responsibility to implement some of these proposals, actually has the tool, yeah,
correct,
or
correct.
tools to be able now to implement. I think that is an issue because you're right. Sometimes you call in a department after hearing a budget and you speak to someone and say, "Oh, we've not gotten any details on that. We don't know how that is to be rolled out." And so on. So I
Correct.
think that is often an issue when it comes to budgets and budget presentations.
Well, that is, you see, and that's the issue of having them so close to the estimates, right? So
Hmm.
traditionally, a budget was meant, and again, you can change it whatever to whatever you wish in order to achieve your goals, right? But a budget was simply a midterm strategy that allowed the government to take in new information as the fiscal year went on, and you can rechart course. How it's being used right now seems more as a ratification of the items discussed during the estimates, right? It seems more as of a ratification. And herein is the issue because um, it's almost taking the place of a throne speech as a result, almost, right?
Mm,
And you don't have to formulate a lot of the supporting legislation, a lot of the amendments that might be necessary. And in doing so, it's very hard for someone like me to say how well something could work in the near term, particularly big moves like this collateral registry, right?
mm,
And big moves such as in terms of particular small business items, the factoring, because they don't have to set up the structure, not just the legislation, because they've had that practice before with the central bank. That's partially the reason why the central bank has been allowed to push this initiative or manage it. It has been or used to be, especially when they came into the workforce, there was a facility managed by the central bank then 20 odd years ago. But
mm,
with that, it's easy to move around that, right? That's a stroke of a pen at the minister's pleasure. No real
mm.
major needs for amendments to support the VAT. So like that one for me is pertinent because it's one that doesn't take much time for the government to implement. It's at the pleasure of the Minister of Finance, truthfully, to make these amendments, right? So the others, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, and I want more information before I say anything with confidence, especially since my words have been apparently not matching up. My morning and evening words haven't been matching up on VOB of relate, it seems. So I
Yes,
want to be careful.
I took note of that from your contribution to Brasat Sunday.
Everybody took note of it. I was in St. Vincent and I heard that I supported it. And I was like, what? And then I heard it and I could not believe that's what they got from it. So I'm just rather cautious right now with things that aren't
Don't worry.
reality.
Don't worry,
Yeah,
we've all been there. We've
I
all
know,
been
right?
there. The media always looks for a clip that they think is sensational enough that
Mm.
can give them a few points, irrespective if it is actually accurate at times. So, we've all been there. Don't worry. When I heard it, I said, nah. I doubt very much Jeremy said that, or in that context, I should say.
in in that context is correct.
Yes, yes. Okay. All right. So, folks, we are at 14 past. Our time is 15 past the hour to conclude. I'm looking at the chat to see if there are any final questions or comments for Jeremy to respond to. But if you have not yet done so, please go to the chat now and click on the link and complete this short survey for us. It's really going to give us good information on your overall assessment and perspectives of the budget, especially as it relates to small business activity here in Barbados. As you heard, there were several measures announced for the sector. And let me really thank many of you small business members who helped us in our various focus groups and polling and so on to formulate our request to government. This is a part of the process. Every year, government reaches out to a number of stakeholders, inviting them to give comments, inviting them to submit proposals on areas that they would wish to see addressed in the budget, and the SBA had that opportunity again this year. We would have, as I said, conducted some polls. We had some focus groups with you throughout the year on a number of measures, and we were able to put forward some proposals, and we were pleased to see that a number of the proposals that we submitted were actually included in this year's budgetary presentation. So thanks to you, members, for helping us in this vein. So again, we ask you to complete the survey because the more feedback we get from you, the better able we are to position those thoughts, those requests, those proposals, and so on in our conversations with the government and the various government departments. So please do continue to assist us in this vein. All right, so we've concluded our session today. As the saying goes, that's a wrap now for us for another webinar. Members of the association, please listen out, look out to the next quarter and the activities that we have in store. April to June coming up. We again will engage you in a number of educational sessions, networking sessions, overall informational sessions, getting your feedback on issues, having a conversation with you on areas that we can enhance lobbying and the like as we continue to roll out our work plan for this fiscal period. So you can listen out for the announcements on the next quarter events. Okay. Again, as I said at the beginning, the session is recorded today, as is all of our webinars. And in another day or two, you're going to get that link coming out that you can go back and you can review the information. The appendix that Jeremy spoke to is the appendix to the proposals. Again, that's going to be shared in the presentation that you'll receive, so you can go through that at your leisure and pleasure. We want to thank Jeremy. Any final thoughts, Jeremy, as we wrap up? Final salvo on the overall budget. I'm not going to ask you to rate it, but final thoughts for for the sector, for the business
No,
community.
it's a budget that gives, but there's a lot that has to be considered in terms of its ability to take away. And he actually drew one that I didn't even get to cover in the comments there. While raising the threshold, reduce it, VAT threshold, reduces the administrative burden. Businesses falling below the new threshold will suffer irrecoverable VAT costs on their purchases. So it may mean a price adjustment one way or another. Although I still believe it allows them to be competitive depending on the industry. The
Mm,
irrecoverable VAT cost is a burden in and of itself. Um, it's not a cash flow burden because government takes
yeah.
forever to recover, but nonetheless,
Mm,
it is one.
yeah.
So I'm saying it's a budget that gives as much as it takes away in terms of the actual policies and also the fact that I don't think personally it did enough to pertain to the global instability that we do have. I would suggest that the SBA does do another session what the VAT um on what the VAT means, the change in VAT means for the members. And
Yes. Hmm.
Anki and others that are way more knowledgeable on the VAT side than I am are going to be key there if you can
Yeah.
have her do
Okay.
it. Mhm.
Thank you very much. And I think that that particular provision is supposed to take effect from October 1. So you are right.
Correct.
We do have some time to look at that. But I saw the comment and I will say to Anki as well that in our submission and discussion with members, the point has always been raised that any firm, knowing the nature of business that they're in and they want to register for VAT, even though they're below the 350, that they can still do so. So that provision is always there that a firm can register. But in terms of the administrative cost and the burden, we think that far outweighs the other point that has been made. So it's going to be a benefit, a significant benefit, we believe, for the sector, raising it to the 350. But you're right, we'll come back and have a conversation around that a little later on. I see Praveen is also asking for that type of topic for another webinar, and that's fine. We'll come back and share with you before we get to the October start date for that particular measure. So once again, Jeremy, as usual, thank you for so graciously accepting and coming on and sharing your expertise, your wisdom with us here at the SBA and all of the partners on this call. Again, please click the link for this survey. What are your thoughts? And give us your feedback. Just 7 questions we are asking you to share with us this morning before you go off the call. This has been another in our webinar series from the Small Business Association of Barbados as we continue to engage, to enlighten, to inform our members and our stakeholders on issues that affect business in Barbados. Thank you very much. I've been your moderator, Dr. Lynette Holder, and we continue to avail ourselves to you, our members. If there's any issues that you need follow-up questions or queries on, please don't hesitate to contact us at the Secretariat. Jeremy, again, a pleasure. Thank you so much. Everyone, have a good day. God bless you all. See you on the next occasion. Bye-bye for now.